Hey there, welcome to Radio Face. As always, my name is Daniel Trinham, and I will be your host. It is truly an honor that you have decided to tune in for today's episode, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Before we begin today's episode, I want to let you know that this show is in no way affiliated with the other show that I host, The Third Seat. However, if you'd like to check out The Third Seat, then you can find the information and links for it in the description of today's episode. I think you will really enjoy it as well, so I highly recommend you check it out. Along with this, you can find all other links to my social media accounts, as well as any necessary information for any guests that may join me on the show, or myself down in the description of today's episode. With all that being said, I want to thank you again for listening in to today's episode. Now let's jump into the conversation. So I grew up in a predominantly white community in a very rural community. It's a little town called Englewood, Tennessee. It's about an hour up the road from here in Chattanooga, and it's home for me. But like I said, it's a very rural area. It's a predominantly white community. It's just right at the foot of the mountains. And the thing we boast is we've got one stoplight. We have a subway that we're very proud of, not the train, the restaurant. But it's East Tennessee, Appalachia. It's exactly what you would think of it. And, with the year of 2020, I'm sure if there's not already, there will definitely be books written about it. And there will be sections in history books about it, just about everything that happened. But when the pandemic initially hit in 2020, it was kind of weird for me in my hometown because, like I said, it was a very rural area. There wasn't like bustling streets or anything, and nobody really knew what to make of it at the time. And then it was just, everybody was kind of like, nobody really knew what the best precaution was, and it was just a lot of uncertainty. Right. And then the next big, there was all kinds of stuff that happened in 2020, but the next big occurrence that took place in actually around this time in 2020 was the passing of George Floyd. And obviously there's been lots said about that. There's been a lot written about that. And not to speak for everybody from my hometown, but I remember being there during the time. It just felt like there was kind of like this tension in the air. Like everybody was really uncomfortable to talk about what was going on, for I would imagine a myriad of different reasons, but it was just like, it was kind of the elephant in the room that nobody really wanted to talk about. And ever since then, I have wanted to do something. I never really knew how to best go about it, but I wanted to do something to try to learn more, to give back, to do what I can to make a positive impact in the right direction. Because the last thing that any of us want is another incident like what happened with George Floyd. And so if there's anything I can do to help not allow that to happen anymore, or to make a positive impact on the world, or to maybe help others like myself who came from a predominantly white rural background, to help them better understand these different causes, then I want to do that. And I hope that today is my chance to do that. So without any further ado, Marie, thank you for joining me today.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here and have a conversation with you.
Yeah, no problem. So before we jump in, just give a little bit about who you are, what you do, how you got here, and just who you are and everything about you, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind it at all. So my name is Marie Mott, for those who are going to listen to this, and I am a young African-American woman who was born and raised on the east side of Chattanooga. So I actually came from a community called Churchville, which is right across from Bushtown, which is actually the first African-American township in the country, right here in Chattanooga. And, I grew up in a community that was thriving, where people took care of one another, mm-hmm. People had pride in the community. Yeah. And I was raised with my grandmothers who grew up during segregation mm-hmm. in Chattanooga, and was instilled with a great understanding of the historical reference of the contribution that African Americans mm-hmm. have made, not only nationally, but regionally and locally. But also, there was certain small conversations that I would hear about things that have been happening even in Chattanooga when mm-hmm. it comes to racism or police brutality.
Yeah.
And so currently I am a city council candidate, but my journey as far as hopping off the porch and getting into the community as an adult, because I did it a lot as a child. And like I have a family of advocates who took care of the community. So I was raised to take care of the people and have a love for taking care of the people. I got back into that as an adult after Mike Brown. You know, I know we talk a lot about George Floyd, but even in 2020, George Floyd, we saw him murdered, but he wasn't the only one. We had Ahmaud Arbery, we had Breonna Taylor, we had Elijah McClain, we had Rashard Brooks. There's so many different people and names that we know and names in which we do not know that died that year at the hands of police. But my journey started pretty much really after Sandra Bland. Is when Mike Brown happened, and for me that was kind of like the shaking for me, but the awakening for me was really like Sandra Bland, that I needed to just get out of my corporate America bubble and get back into the community, and then just seeing like the conditions of what had happened in Chattanooga as far as the increased gap and inequality and inequity here in our city. And just wanting to do something about it. And so I'm not a complainer. And so I had a conversation with my father. I love my father. And we were sitting down and I was talking to him about some of the frustrations about what I was seeing in our community and how I wanted to be a positive influence. And I asked him, I was like, I don't know where to start. And he was like, well, based on what you're telling me, why don't you go down to city council and go to the meetings? And I'm like, well, when are those? What are they for? Right? And so I started going and my mind was blown, like, oh my goodness, there are people here that make decisions about money and zoning and all sorts of kind of things. And so that started like a journey that has been a wild ride for me. Because I never expected that, just being a person who had learned some of the basics of civics in school, but not really understanding the full impact of civics and civic engagement, and connecting the dots of how do people in positions of power and leadership make decisions that impact community and demographics of folks. Connecting the dots and going on this journey has been a wild ride, because it started just going and listening and then slowly speaking, which was, most people think like I ended up, like you see me in 2020. But people, if you were to rewind back to like 2017 and see me like the first time I spoke, I felt like I was sweating bullets. Because, at that time you have 5 minutes at city council to say something. And I remember kind of like fumbling over my words, even though it was just 9 people in front of me. It felt like I was in front of people who would judge me for what I was gonna. You know what I'm saying? I was kind of intimidated. And so, but I kept coming back. I kept speaking up, and I feel like the training ground of getting civically engaged is what gave me the courage to be able to speak up years down the road when there was an opportunity for us to really come together as a city and really speak about what was happening, not only nationally, but even in Chattanooga. And so I have just enjoyed this journey from city council to radio to community impact to now running for city council, leading protests. Man, I never expected 75% of what has happened to me or I've taken part of to happen. But, I firmly believe that when you see something that is going on and it's wrong, even if you don't have the full understanding of what to do about it, if you're just willing to go into a room and even just try to begin to pull the pieces together about what you could possibly do, that is a great start.
Yeah.
It's so much better than doing nothing. Most people would take for granted
Yeah.
even what we're doing right now,
Yeah.
which is what needs to happen a lot more.
Yeah.
It's conversation,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? A lot of us feel like, to change the world, we got to go out there with like a cape.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Be Superman.
Throw the bat signal in the air. Yeah.
and that's not what is required. So much change can really come in us beginning to understand one another
Yeah.
and be receptive of one another,
Yeah.
even if we don't agree.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I'm appreciative that this is an opportunity for me to do some of the things that I love, and that's
Yeah.
just talk to people
Yeah.
and learn from you as you learn from me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly what I hope comes from this. Oftentimes what I've found is that if there's any like major problem that occurs, or like any, it's this like big news headline, like, oh, this terrible thing happened. Oftentimes the root of that problem started a long time ago. It wasn't like it just happened right then and there and, oh my goodness, we should have been better then. It's like there's a lot, it's like a slow drip of things happening. And just like what you said, I think oftentimes specifically about, regarding what we're talking about, there's just a lack of understanding, or there's not enough conversations happening. As I said, like I grew up in a predominantly white area, and these conversations I'm not speaking for everybody, but like I don't see them happening a lot. And part of that is just because it's a predominantly white area, but at the same time, it can be uncomfortable to have these conversations, But I think that when you have these conversations, when you make these small efforts, you don't have to put on your cape, like you said. You can just sit down with somebody and just better understand each other. That's really where these problems, I think, begin to be resolved. When you have something like the passing of, you mentioned Sandra Bland. It's funny you mentioned her. I forget when she passed, but I had never heard about her in my entire life up until about maybe a couple weeks ago. I was reading Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's a great book. He's probably my favorite my favorite author. And he opens the book talking about what happened to her, and he ends the book talking about what happened to her. And really, which I don't want to spoil the book for everybody. If you're listening, go check it out. It's a great book. And Malcolm, if you're listening, I want to talk to you someday. But it really boils down to, there was just a big divide between the understanding of Sandra Bland, and I forget the name of the police officer that was speaking with her that day, but it really boils down to there was a divide between the two. There was not an understanding between what was happening that day. And sure, there could have been a lot of things done in that instance right then and there that could have changed things, but in reality, to me, if we collectively begin to try to better understand each other, even before those instances take place, before the police lights ever turn on, if we consciously make an effort to better understand each other, I feel like the cases of Sandra Bland and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd will begin to slowly diminish. That when we better understand each other, it's a lot easier to empathize and to see the humanity in other people. And that's ultimately what I hope is the result of this conversation today. Not just for me, not just for you, but for anybody who listens. Whoever it is, I hope that this can be a benefit to everybody, and hopefully we'll make a positive impact in the end. So, yeah.
I'm sure we will. And, I want you, the listener, to understand something. James Baldwin, who is probably one of my favorite authors, talked about there just being this unwillingness for us to accept the reality of American history. The thing that is a little bit difficult about acknowledging how we got here is acknowledging the genesis, or the beginning and the founding of these United States, even before there was one. Before we had a United States of America, we had chattel slavery. We had the separation of based on the color of skin and where a person comes from, their value in the eyes of others. And even though we framed in the Constitution that we're all equal in the eyes of God, that wasn't what we were living up to. And I'm sure there's a lot of, James Baldwin talks about removing the mask, and basically when we remove the mask, that behind that is a lot of pain. There's pain that we have to deal with that comes with acknowledging what we see. And I want people to understand the only reason, if I could be transparent, that we were able to really pause and have a moment in 2020 was because COVID made us. The world effectively shut down. And it's not like, these instances haven't been happening. I mean, it took us over 100 years here in Chattanooga just to acknowledge Ed Johnson being lynched from the Walnut Street Bridge, and he's not the only one, right? So, it's taken far too long to get to this point, and part of it is because by somehow thinking that we want to address the elephant in the room, that allows us to be able to escape the pain, but the pain is a part of the process of what it takes to be able to move towards healing. It's an acknowledgement of what happened, what has happened. And even though you may not have done anything, I want you to understand that the world that was created has given unequal footing based on who we are. And the only way that we can create equal footing is to acknowledge how this world was structured. And if we look at that from a historical aspect, we got to remove the emotion out of it. The historical aspect, the facts are what they are. The way the country was made is how it's made. Now, how we choose to have a country going forward is the most important part. And I think that is the opportunity of where we need to see about 2020. One of the books that I read for a second time, if you read a book, read it again, like a couple of years down the road, because you'll go back and you'll see so much that you missed the first time you read it, was Where Do We Go From Here by Martin Luther King Jr. And he wrote the book a couple of months before he was assassinated. And he actually wrote it when he took a vacation. Shout out to activists who actually prioritized their rest, because that is important.
Sounds like a productive vacation.
It was a productive vacation, and he went on vacation with his wife and his children. And I happened to see a picture of Dr. King like 6 months ago, that it was him shirtless in the waters of Jamaica. And I was like, that needs to be normalized. We always see him in a suit, but we never see him as the man who just got to chill. The man. Right? Just the individual. Right? And so he wrote Where Do We Go From Here, really just talking about, the civil rights struggle, some of the wins, some of the difficulties even after certain legislation like Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act have been passed, and where he was kind of trying to see, do we need to go from this moment? And so when I read that book, it really spoke to me about like 2020. It was really like this culmination in America of us kind of revisiting, a rendezvous with the past, of us getting to decide, where do we go from here? Because, to James Baldwin's point, countries rarely ever fall from the outside. They fall and crumble from within, and that is because we as human beings put up so many barriers that just, they don't belong there. Even though you might look different from me, if your experiences may be different from me, that is the beauty of humanity.
Exactly.
Right? I look at people like a tapestry, and how alone, one strand, it doesn't look like anything, right?
It's just a strand.
Right? It looks like raggedy. But when you take all of those individual strands of different colors, of different thicknesses, and you weave them together, right? You get something that is unlike anything else. And that is what America is. It is this country of different beauty, of different perspectives, different people. And we have to have respect for that. And if we can start with conversations, if we can acknowledge where we've come from, but also decide that we can do things differently going forward, there's the opportunity. And that's what I want people to see. 2020 was an opportunity, and it still is, even into the extension of right now. Where do we want the future to lie for us? And do we want it to mirror some of the same pain of the past and some of the same mistakes in which we've already made? Or do we want to choose a new destiny that includes a lot of people who we have often left behind?
And I love the way you said how part of, which I hadn't really thought about this, but part of why the killing of George Floyd and everything that happened in the preceding days and weeks and months, part of why that happened was because we really had no other choice but to look in the mirror as a society. There have been countless of murders of all different people of different creeds and colors that come and go, but for some reason that one sticks out, and I think that's why. My worry is that we're beginning to forget about these things. We're almost 2 years removed here in a couple days from when that took place. COVID is kind of beginning to be an afterthought to a degree, where it's not dominating the headlines, and my worry is that things are maybe not really, we might be going back to square one to a degree as a society. And so with that in mind, what in your mind is the I don't want to say the biggest problem, but the biggest area for growth that we as a society have to keep carrying this torch forward? I remember at the time when there was all these protests and there was people all over the place talking about this issue, and people that I would have never expected to have these conversations were having these conversations. But it seems to me, and I could be wrong, it seems to me like that fervor is beginning to die down to a degree. Like nobody's really talking about it anymore. What to you is the biggest area for growth that we have as a society to keep carrying that torch forward and to keep making the correct and positive strides into the future? Because the last thing we want is to repeat the past. We want to acknowledge it and learn from it, but like you said, we make the future. And if we don't acknowledge the past and look in that mirror and learn from the past, we're probably bound to repeat it,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing is let's just look at history. And It doesn't even have to be American history. Let's look at Rome. Go back and see that, when you have people who refuse to acknowledge what's going on, a nation can quickly fall apart. And so I want people to understand is that if the ship go down, we all going down together. I'm not trying to be a pessimist. I'm an optimist because I'm alive, and I feel like if I'm still breathing, there's an opportunity for change. But that is the main thing. We struggle. We have such an immunity to change. Change scares the living daylights out of us, but I need you on the other end to understand there are three things that are certain in life: death, taxes, and change. You will not be able to escape the fact that the world is shifting, that we have to be agile beings. We have to go with what my mom calls the ebbs and flows of life. And I want you to know that, here it is. 50 years ago, we couldn't do this. So change has already happened. And I want you to be encouraged about that we're here in a moment that, for our grandparents.
A generation ago.
Right.
Less than a lifetime ago.
This would be unacceptable, right? So, and especially with you as a man, this would be unacceptable. So, the thing that I want to put before the people is, do you want better for your children? Do you want better for your children and grandchildren? And looking at how we in this country, we're brothers and sisters. I mean, if you could see me, I am not that far away as far as the color of my skin from you, right? We're more related than we are distant. And the simple fact of, Chattanooga has very peculiar history that is tied to the Civil War. There's black and white bodies in this soil. Right? So, there's never been a period of struggle in which we've ever had where we all did it alone. Anytime we have ever gone through a dark hour in our nation, where we're staring down the abyss of uncertainty and possible threat to our way of life, we've somehow found a way. Race could go out of gender could go out of our mind. How can we do that in a way that is more than superficial? or more than when we're in danger from others who are looking to, spar with us or war with us. But how can we, turn that mirror on us and begin to understand that there are ways in which we have more in common than we actually realize.
We do, yeah.
I had the opportunity to go to Harvard for the Emerging Leaders Program for 2022, and we had a wonderful conversation with Professor Julia Minson of the Kennedy School about perception versus reality, and how we did a case study between Democrats and Republicans of how one side perceived one another worse than the other.
Yeah.
But the reality is that there were so many of viewpoints that were actually more in common than they thought.
Yeah.
And the research showed that there was more in common. And so, one thing that is important, I love talking about history because there's a lot that we miss because we just either don't know, or like you said, you learned about Sandra Bland because of reading a book.
Yeah.
Reading is so important.
Yes.
It opens your eyes to things that, if you come from a majority of anything community, majority Black, you might not know about white brothers and sisters, vice versa. You might not know about an international perspective. So all of us, don't think that even I, as a African American woman, don't need to educate myself about others around me. I do. To have a respect for their cultures and the things that you have experienced, because it's just as important as mine.
Yeah.
And the only way that I can cherish that is to understand, who are you and where do you come from? Appalachia, I love that you talked about that. There is a beautiful history of shared community between white and Black people in Appalachia. If you go back and look, some of the very first people in American history that wrote laws against chattel slavery were white Quakers. Who were putting out legislation and being abolitionists before it was even cool.
Way before this.
So there is a history, that this undercurrent that I want people to tap into, that everybody has not always silently agreed with what's going on. And so how can you be a part of that crew, right?
Exactly.
And that doesn't mean that you have to put a Black Lives Matter yard sign in your yard, flag it from your home. But if you can just be open to talking to people, if you can be open to listening to someone's experience and just processing that. If you can be open to, I don't know, pick up a book and just see what comes out of that and how that may shape or form your perspective and widen that. You know? I think part of the problem is not just that we don't talk to one another, it's just we don't know enough about one another. And the more that we can expound our viewpoint and see one another, that's how we increase the humanity.
And something I remember hearing, not from a lot of people, but I would hear this from time to time is, if this conversation would come up, whether it's between like me and some friends or anybody, like during, the months or so following George Floyd's death, inevitably I would hear someone say, well, things are a lot better than they used to be for African Americans. Like, they used to be enslaved, and then they, there was all the laws against them, and like they're pretty much they're free now. And like to a degree, like we were just talking about, like 50 years ago this wouldn't happen. But to me, something never sat right with me about that, because I was like, but that's somewhat disingenuous, because yes, there have been improvements. That's, obviously the slavery is no longer taking place in that manner. And, obviously there's been different laws that have been created and different laws that have been abolished that should have been created and should have been abolished. But that doesn't change the fact that people are dying. That doesn't change the fact that there is, at large, this is obviously it's a case by case basis, but we can look at Chattanooga. The African American community, is the odds of someone, being born here, the odds of them being in poverty is a lot higher than someone that's born white. Now, that's not to say that there are no people that are white that are in poverty, and it's not to say that there are no African Americans who have, are filthy rich. There's obviously going to be extremes, but there's still issues that permeate to this day, whether it directly affects me or whether it directly affects you or not, And I think if we just kind of say, oh, well, things are better than they used to be, that's kind of disingenuous to it. You're ignoring the problems. It's like you break the vase and you scoot it under the rug. It's like, well, it's okay. It still looks fine. Like, well, no, there's still a broken vase underneath the rug that needs to be cleaned up. Like, there's still problems that need to be addressed. And that's where I think, like you said, you don't have to have the Black Lives Matter cape on. Like, it's going to be different for everybody, your level of advocacy and how loud about it you want to be. But at the very least, I think if we're not open to just hearing other individuals, hearing their perspective and just hearing what is bothering them or what they've experienced, we're going to either stay where we're at or we're going to begin regressing. Because if I can't be willing to listen to you, how can I expect to know what's troubling you? How can I expect to know what's troubling your community? How can I expect to know what's, what is different about your culture than mine? We won't know those things. And that's, in my opinion, that's what I think is the easiest way to start, because yes, these conversations can be uncomfortable. They can be difficult. They can be hard to know where to start. But if you don't start to have these conversations, especially now when, we tend to forget about the things that are happening. I guarantee there've probably been African Americans that have died at the hands of police in 2022, and you don't hear them as much in the news headlines anymore because we've got distractions now. I guarantee that still happens, but if we don't have these conversations, they'll probably continue to happen into the future with no changes, and that's what I don't want to happen. I want less of that. And I hope that, to me, not everybody wants to speak, and that's fine. I can talk to a wall all day if you give me the chance, but everyone can listen. That's the thing. The old saying goes, you've got two ears and one mouth, so listen before you speak, but everybody can listen. And I think if we're not even willing to listen to the other individual, the other party, anybody different from us, we can't expect to see these changes. And that's what I hope happens in the future, is just more people are willing to listen, more people are willing to hear out the struggles and the problems that are taking place. I don't want us to just keep pushing this under the rug, metaphorically speaking. And it's inspiring to me to see individuals like yourself that probably, I'm assuming, have faced a lot of challenges like this in your past, and know a lot of individuals that have faced a lot of different issues that maybe I haven't faced, or individuals like me have not faced. But it's inspiring to see that you're still carrying that torch forward. You're not saying, oh, well, it'll be okay. It's whatever. I'll figure something else out, and I'll, go get a job and work whatever. Like, it's inspiring to me to see that there are still individuals like yourself that are carrying this forward and trying to make a difference. And I think the world needs more of that, in my opinion,
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, a lot of people mischaracterize what it means to be an African-American advocate or activist. Even though we are taking up the banner of pushing for true equity in this society and liberation, it's not just anything that we've ever done has never been just beneficial for Black people alone, right? Well,
we're all humans. Right. I mean, in my mind, I don't know, for me, it's like, especially people on, that are not African Americans, like, we shouldn't look at this as like, oh, it's affecting the African American community. Like, yes, it is, but they're also people. Like, when you see someone, if I saw you, like, hurt on the side of the road, I wouldn't be like, oh, well, she's a African-American female, I'm not. So that doesn't bother me. Like, no, you're a person. Like, it doesn't matter. It should not matter what it looks, if you're on the other side of things, we should still be willing to hear out and listen to what's troubling you, Yeah.
Absolutely. Dr. King talked about in his letter from Birmingham jail, he said, we're caught in the inescapable network of mutuality and tied in a single garment of destiny. And whatsoever happens to one shall impact the other, whether that's directly or indirectly. Mm-hmm. We are connected. Mm-hmm. And so, I want people to just see how has time played out. There's really been kind of like if you really just look at history, you'll see this really back and forward of how we as the masses of people, regardless of the color of our skin, have intentionally been harmed. It's not just Black people.
Yeah.
Now that a lot happens to us disproportionately.
Yeah.
But like you talked about, poverty is not something that's like strictly within the Black community, right? There are white people there are more white people who are in poverty than African American people, right? We had internet in the inner city before fiber optics was starting to be expanded to the rural areas. So I want people to understand that when I talk about things, even though the impact I want to make is directly in my community, the reach, like the rippling effect, like it's like skipping a rock on a river. The rippling effect, I want it to have a secondary benefit to people who are not in my community. If I fight for things that will improve my community, that ultimately is going to bring up the standard of living for everyone around me as well. And so I want people to understand is, yes, am I advocating for things to come up in my community? Yes, but do I want the residuals of my hard labor and my effort to go as far as rural Tennessee? Absolutely. There are more hospitals that have been closed down in Tennessee in the rural areas than any part of the state. I want you to know that even though you've never met me, this might be the first time you've ever heard my voice. I've looked at what's impacting you and what's hurting you. And it's just as concerning to me. And even though we've never met and might never meet, I want you to understand that I love you and I care about what's going on where you are. And part of what America has done, because like if you go, I think it was Dolly Parton's, Dollywood.
Yes.
It's like a museum up there that talks about criminal history. If you go into the museum, the majority of the major criminals up until about the 1920s and 30s were almost all white. Now it's nearly black and brown people, right? It's always been kind of like this flip-flop of, America will turn white people through the grind and Black people through the grind. And part of the experiment of how we don't make progress is to pit us. Empire has always pit us against one another. Because I think people in power understand, just like they did in Chattanooga. Oh my goodness. It's not just those rambunctious, Black neighborhood kids. There's all kinds of people showing up downtown making a similar demand. There is more, not only more in common that we have together, but more that we can accomplish and get done together if we come together around the same issues. I'm concerned about healthcare probably just as much as you are wherever you are. I'm concerned about the education of the children in my community just as much as you are. I want internet access for my community just as much. Are those all things that we have in common? So what if we took race off the table? Right? But if as long as we just continue to not just acknowledge, if you go back and look at history and Bacon's Rebellion, part of why race is a man-made structure, why it was created, was because Black and white people came together and burned down Jamestown in Virginia and held the port for 2 months. And they said, oh my goodness, if these people come together and start making demands on a regular and consistent basis about their needs, right? Because you had indentured servants and slaves.
We have strength in numbers,
whether you're gonna be a slave for 7 years as an indentured servant or a slave forever. It's all slavery, right? And so the creation of a separation of us by the distinction of what we look like was a tactic to keep us from ever being able to do what we're doing. Talk to one another, right? Because that's kind of like the things that were forbidden and coded into law. We can't talk with one another. We can't live with one another. We can't marry one another. We can't do these things together. Because if we do that, oh my goodness, we might begin to recognize where the real problems are lying. And that is that we are people who can actually make more massive change instead of abdicating our power to others who we never really see to be responsible for what happens in our community. And so I just want people to, pull up Bacon's Rebellion, go back and look at how, just look at how, crack era in the 90s, opioids right now, and how that's that's torn up Appalachia and rural America. You know, if we don't get this thing right, it's what happens to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
The scales are always going to balance from one side to the next.
Yeah. And you know, the thing is, like, so like I said, I grew up in a very rural, I don't have the numbers, but I would imagine a relatively low income area. I know a lot of the people that you know, live where I live, they work blue collar jobs. And it's not like, you know, this term that was often brought up, especially, you know, after the passing of George Floyd, was these systemic issues. That was that phrase, and all the time I would hear people be like, "Well, what does that even mean?" Like, you know, there's not like there's like somebody pulling the strings in the back, like, "Oh, we're gonna do this, that, and the other." But that's, to me, even though issues that may be affecting the African American community may be different from, you know, the community I grew up in, there's still issues that impact my community similar to the impact yours. Like you said, the opioid epidemic that's currently taking place, I saw all the time through high school, through my college years, all the time. I would see so many individuals suffering from that are as white as this curtain over here. I saw so many individuals that suffered from these problems. And like you said, just because these problems may be different, like, you know, they affect people in different ways, a rising tide lifts all ships, as the saying goes, kind of like what you alluded to. If you are able to bring change, positive change for your community, that's going to have a rippling effect out to everybody. And it's not just about, oh, how can I benefit this community or how can I benefit that community? It's like, no, how can we help everyone? You know, like you said, we all want a good education for our children. We all want good healthcare. We all want, you know, good infrastructure. All of these things affect us all relatively the same way. So how can we fix these issues? How can we begin to have the conversations to acknowledge, you know, the elephant in the room and say, hey, this is not what we want it to be. It affects all of us similarly. We're all dealing with the same issue. How can we begin to resolve this, you know? And I think that's incredibly important, because if we don't begin to acknowledge that maybe we do suffer from similar problems, maybe we suffer from different problems, we're still suffering from problems at the end of the day. The root problem that we are all suffering from these systemic injustices is still the case. You know, like I said, I would see people all the time in my hometown that were suffering from this opioid epidemic. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I'm sure you see people all the time here in Chattanooga that may not look like me that suffer from different issues, and you see it all the time. Yeah. And if we can begin to resolve these problems, it's more than likely going to have a positive impact on everyone, or a vast majority of people, not just the people you know, not just people that I know, but communities all across the world, you know. At least I would like to imagine it would. And that's really what I hope that people understand, is just because, you know, you advocate very strongly for the African American community doesn't mean that it's just limited to that community.
Absolutely.
It helps everyone. It really does. And that's what I hope that people understand, is it's not just limited to a single community. It's you know, it's inclusive for everybody, you know?
Absolutely. There's a method to the madness I want people to understand.
Yeah.
Like, I know that if I can chip away at change and make it successful where I'm at, the next step is, how can I widen the net of safety and stability for others around me? Because now we have a tangible and visible way of seeing that change and progress is possible. You know, for a lot of us, we're apathetic, if we just be real cynical, right? Yeah. That we have kind of given up hope. But I want you to be able to hold on to that and just be encouraged. You know, I call myself a CEO. I'm the Chief Encouraging Officer.
Yeah.
Chief Encouragement Officer.
I love that.
That is my job.
Yeah.
First of all, we're family. That's how I address everybody.
Yeah.
Not just Black people.
For reference, when so this is my first time meeting Marie in person. When I walked out to meet her, I extended my hand for a handshake, and she said, "No, I do hugs." So she's not lying. She is not lying, and I appreciate that.
I mean,
yeah.
God made all of us, and just gave us a different lens of being able to see life differently. Because if we were all the same, that would be boring, right?
Yeah.
Like, different cultures is a way of you getting a opportunity to go on a journey with someone. And having an opportunity to go on many journeys in a lifetime is a blessing, right? to be able to taste different food, hear different kinds of music, feel different kinds of vibes,
Mhm.
see how, a turnip for your community is different from a turnip for mine. To say that I went to a square dance, but
Yeah.
then you went to a house party in the inner city.
Yeah.
That's dope. Right?
Yeah.
We've had many experiences in a lifetime.
Yeah.
There's where an opportunity lies. Democracy is an experiment. If you look at what we wrote down at the beginning of our country, we weren't really living up to that.
Mm-mm.
It has only been us scrambling and coming together, no matter how rat-a-tatted that was at any point in history, that we have expanded the true meaning of what was written on paper is exactly what is existing in our society. Because when we started, we said all men are equal. Well, what about women?
Yeah.
Right?
What about the other 50% of people here?
Right.
Yeah.
What about the children?
Yeah.
Right? Children often get left out of the conversation.
Yeah.
They have a whole perspective and opinion as well. So I've come to learn working in the schools and talking with young people and speaking with them. Good God, they're more informed than I see most adults are.
Yeah.
We have expanded the reach of what democracy and what stability and what inclusiveness actually means. But that job is not done. We can't pat ourselves on the back and feel like, okay, we did a 1965 Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. So, that's the most.
So we're good now.
And affirmative action. And that's where our job has ended. I mean, as we're seeing right now, this is bigger than the African American community, even though, that is a part of the conversation. But let's look at Roe v. Wade, what's going on right now. There's a lot that's being discussed that's impacting different demographics of people. And so how we choose to continue to experiment with this democracy. A democracy is a government that derives its power from the people, meaning that the people have power. My job is to give people some power.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I want you, wherever you are, I want you to be empowered. That we all can chisel out and forge a new destiny, that we can trailblaze a new path. And what does that look like if everybody has a seat at the table?
Exactly.
And can speak up at the table and be heard. Because that's really all what most people want.
Yeah.
They just want to be heard.
They just want to be on equal ground, and that is so important because I have been blessed in many ways in my life. I have a great family. They have done very many things that they have done so many things to help me get to where I am today. That to act like where I'm at today is because of purely just me is being very disingenuous. And I think that just having that really is what a lot of people want is just being able to be heard, being able to voice how they feel and not feel not necessarily criticized, but not feel like they're going to be torn down because of how they feel, and the ability to be heard. That's really what most people want, like you said. And I think that's just so important because if you can't listen to other people, if you can't just at the very least hear or be willing to hear what other people have to say, that really can have a negative ripple effect. It begins to cause problems that you don't see right now. But if I stop listening to individuals, other than myself, that can cause other people to stop listening. And that really can have a negative impact to where we see things like the tragedies we've been speaking about. Those things can occur because of that, Something you mentioned that I'm really glad is children. I think we oftentimes forget about them in these conversations. These conversations like, the adults are talking here. We're gonna talk about this. But in reality, I mean, if there's one thing I've learned, I don't personally have children, but I have a younger sister, is that they are very to the point. They don't have much of a filter. They're just they just know how they feel and they just say it, And to me, I think that can be a good thing because they can acknowledge things for what they are. If something is good, they'll say it's good. If something is bad, they'll say it's bad. But oftentimes, I think it can be at least the idea of having conversations about race, having conversations about what makes us different, but at the same time makes us, that brings us together, can be difficult to approach. It can be kind of, I would imagine for a parent, if you have a middle school child or maybe an elementary age child, you may think, how do I have this conversation with my child? Or they're asking me these questions and I feel like I have a good answer for it, but I don't know how to tell that to them because again, they're a young child. For you, I mean, how would you say is good for people to have these conversations with children? Because obviously the children below us are who are going to come after us. They are, at one point in time, we were those children, and here we are now having this conversation. If we're not willing to have these open conversations with our children, my worry is that these issues will begin to fade into the background and they won't be discussed nearly as much as they should. And that's obviously not what any of us want. So for you, I mean, how would you recommend individuals have conversations about these things with their children, no matter what their age is?
So the first thing I would say is that it's going to be difficult for a parent to have a conversation if you yourself as an adult are not beginning to do the work, right?
Yeah.
Whether that is just taking in differences in perspectives. A great book that I would advise people to read is that there's a book that talks about the women of the movement, specifically about Betty Shabazz, who was Malcolm X's wife, about Coretta Scott King, and about Medgar Evers' wife, Mrs. Evers, and talks about their journey, because a lot of times we even see just the men.
Yeah.
The women are very much the undercurrent of all movement.
Yeah.
Why didn't you as a parent have to widen your perspective before you can have a conversation? You can't teach if you have not first been a student.
Exactly. Yeah.
So to educate the Latin root of that word, the etymological understanding of that word, I'm a nerd for real, y'all, is to bring people out of darkness.
Yeah.
That's all it means to be educated. It means that you come out of a point of ignorance, which is I just don't know or understand.
Yeah.
To now that I have taught you, you are now enlightened.
Yeah.
And so the only way that you can bring light to people is that you got to get some light.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Educate yourself. Get into James Baldwin, Richard Wright. My goodness, I can give books. Maya Angelou. Good Lord, Audre Lorde.
Yeah.
There are so many people that you can just pick up a book and read. You can read Stamped from the Beginning. You can read, a lot of people think slavery ended at the Emancipation. There's actually a book that addresses that called Slavery by Another Name, which is also a PBS documentary. So there are many things that you can look at to be able to understand. Read it's very, very thin, the narratives of Frederick Douglass. Read The Souls of Black Folk. I mean, I literally can give books all day long.
Yeah.
To understand how segregation works, you can read The Color of Law to see how that process came about.
Yeah.
And just have an understanding of, we talk about systems. How did those systems develop?
Yeah.
How are they still intact to this day?
Yeah.
And then what you do for children is, so the thing that I would say is, up to a certain point, let children be children. I think there's a natural tendency of children to be able to play with one another, love one another. It's adults that interfere with that process. I see kids all the time. They're different.
Yeah.
And that never comes up in conversation because their innocence hasn't been tainted by our own personal adult opinions. I think the job is, how do you kind of break down the information and make it plain to where they can understand it? But your goal is to educate them, not to give them your opinion.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So even if you have some opinions, let them formulate their own conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you let them go on the journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you might give them the experience of is that when they meet other people, instead of already having a preconceived notion because you put something in their head, they can just ask that person directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, I'm glad you brought up that because so, I mean, as a relatively young person, I don't know at what point I stopped referring to myself as a young person. I'm currently 22, so I know I'm younger than I think most people would deem me as young, but I don't know at what point I stopped calling myself that. But I'm just going to ride it out for as long as I can. But as a young person in today's world, to me, I feel like we do not allow people the space to really come to their own conclusions or to formulate their own opinions. As a individual who has a lot of opinions on a lot of different things, I have to understand that even though I feel like I'm doing, or my opinions are coming from a good place, that other people who also are coming from a good place are going to have different opinions. And to me, that should be viewed as a beautiful thing, because if everybody agreed with me on every single thing, there'd be a lot of problems in this world, because I know that I'm flawed. I have the best intentions, but I'm going to mess things up at times. And allowing especially our children to come to their own conclusions, and you can even be honest. Like if a child came up to me and asked me about some issue, you can even say, hey, this is my personal, like, you can tell them the facts and you can say how you personally feel, but make sure they understand that it's your opinion. You know, I always tell people, like, if somebody asks me, like, how do I feel about this issue? I always make sure, like, this is how I feel, but you're free to disagree. You're free to come to your own conclusion. And I hope that at the very least, you'll take my opinion and allow it to help to formulate yours. You may not agree with me. You may not feel like we have the same opinion, but allow it to better educate. Don't just make the goal to make more of yourself, I guess. Don't just make more of your own opinion, but allow others to take your opinion, to take the facts available and then draw their own conclusions.
And be willing. You know, probably the greatest person who did this, who at one point was probably, when he said this, was the most offensive. You know, Malcolm X talked about white people at the beginning stages of his public speaking career as white devils, blue-eyed devils. And that man grew, traveled, started speaking in colleges and various different things. And as he got a little bit older, got more experience, he acknowledged that was not the right thing to say, right?
Yeah.
That no, he went on his Hajj. So as a Muslim, you know, that's one of the things that most people work towards, is going on their journey to Mecca. And he said, when I went to Mecca, I saw all kinds of Muslim people. Yeah. Right? There are Muslim people who are white with blue eyes. Yeah. And so how can I call them my brother if I have a preconceived notion just because of what they look? I'm no better than the people I'm criticizing. Right? Yeah. Because I've already judged you before I know you. And so he had to go back and retract his former statement. Right? Yeah. And that takes a mighty amount of courage. It does. And integrity to be able to say, you know what, I was wrong. Yeah. I was wrong. I didn't know enough then. Yeah. I hadn't read enough then. Yeah. I hadn't traveled enough then. Yeah. And I made a lot of statements that were out of my ignorance. And now that I've gotten a little bit older and I've experienced a little bit, I talk to more people. Yeah. You know, I can't stay where I once was because now, I'll be cutting off my own tongue if I do that, right? Yeah. So be willing, you know, again, part of change is also growth. The more that we begin to experience one another, that helps us grow. Growing is a painful process, right? Yeah. Maya Angelou talks about this, you know, what it means to be a great human being. And she said, you know what? I blow being human all the time. I blow it. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I blow it. I make mistakes. But, you know, it is the fact that I press forward. It's the fact that I pull in so many demographics of people. It's the fact that when I write, you know, some of the books that she wrote were about prostitutes and various different people. And she talked about her experience of when she was doing a book signing, there was a lady who came in, she said, and I could tell from what she had on that, you know, she had just got off the streets of doing her night job. Yeah. Yeah. And she said, you know, the young lady came up and she grabbed my hand. I could feel what she was saying.
Yeah.
So she grabbed my hand and she said, "You saved my life." Just because I pulled it in person. Part of it was because of Maya Angelou's journey and her own personal experience in life. But when we pull one another in, we have no idea who we're saving. We have no idea who we're reaching. I go to the grocery store all the time and go out and about all the time. I was out the other day, and I promise you, a man stopped it wasn't even a stop sign. He stopped in the middle of the street, rolled down the window. I was having a conversation with somebody on their yard, and was like, "Marie, I love you. I'm so proud of you. Keep doing what you have no idea who's watching you, who needs you to be a light in a dark, dark world right now."
Yeah.
You know, and I just want whoever you are, wherever you're listening from, it's not about perfection. It's not about, you don't have to be Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
That's not what we're asking. You don't have to be Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States, to have an impact. Yeah. You can be someone right in the community where you are, just saying, "Hey, man, there's probably a perspective you haven't considered in this. Would you be willing and open to just checking it out?"
And I think what you're getting at here is the importance of not only having role models and examples in our lives, but being a role model and an example in our life. Like, I'm probably never going to arrive to the level of, we'll say, fame, I guess, of Martin Luther King. I really doubt there's going to be sections in history books written about me. I could be wrong. Who knows? But I really doubt that's going to be the case. But like you said, we shouldn't necessarily shoot for that. That's not what we're necessarily aiming for. It should be to have an impact right here where we are right now. That may be one person. Maybe the only people you're connected to is one person you know. We'll do the work to make that improve. That's where you can start. You don't have to have this nationwide reach like Dr. King did, because most people won't get to that level. That's an incredibly difficult position to reach, but an incredibly rare position to reach as well. And I think that's so important that, what you talked about with, it's funny you brought that up with Malcolm X. One, I never knew the second part. All that I ever hear about Malcolm X is like, yeah, he was this activist, but he was kind of like rough around the edges, and he was kind of mean, and like he said all these things, and he's like, yeah. But like, you never, at least me, like, I never heard the second part of like, he kind of went through a personal change.
Well, even a lot of people don't know the beginning of Malcolm's life. So his father was a preacher, and his father was killed by the Ku Klux Klan on a train track.
Really?
Yes, they murdered his father. So, I mean, of course, he's going to grow up and
he's going to be a bit jaded. Yeah.
Have hostility.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they took his father away from him, murdered him, because he followed Marcus Messiah Garvey. You can read some of the speeches of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, his thoughts and speeches. That is a monumental man. But he was a man that talked about, like, before he was what I would say was one of the first iterations of a kind of like a Dr. King level reach. And so his father was what is called a Garveyite. So he believed in Black people coming together, working together, having community. And so that's all he would practice. And he would preach that from the pulpit. And so they killed him. And then his mother went insane. And so then he was raised by his aunts. And then, he talked about as a child, he went to a school that was predominantly white. And even though he was very smart, you could tell he was very smart. I mean, listen to the man's speeches.
He's got a great vocabulary.
Exactly. He loved to read. He wanted to be a lawyer. And his white teacher told him that he couldn't do that, right? So if you don't know where a person comes from, and maybe even how they got to the sentiment, right? What was the root of that? There was pain that was attached to that. Yeah. And then he had some experiences that helped him, I think, widen the perspective that, there were a handful of men at the beginning stages of my life that killed my father, but that's not all white people. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I can acknowledge the two. Yeah. That, there's and we have to understand this, there's a small demographic of people who are driving the majority. Yeah. right?
Yeah.
Driving the perspective of why would we allow that to happen?
Yeah.
That shouldn't happen, right? Because the majority are not going out here and lynching people,
Yeah.
right, or shooting people,
Yeah.
right? So how do we allow space for, I can have a problem with people who believe in racism, but allow space for my white brothers and sisters who don't want any part of that.
Yes. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can balance the two, and to be, like I said, such a man of integrity, just to go back and to put that on the public record.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he could have just wrote that in. I mean, the man does have an autobiography.
Yeah.
He could have just wrote it out on paper, but no.
Yeah.
Just like he spoke it out, he did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So, and then the thing that he said after that was, I'm willing to work with anybody
Mm-hmm.
who wants to work towards liberation for African American people.
Yeah. And I think that's such a, it's not like, no one's perfect, I think it's fairly easy to I think it's fair to say, like, maybe he shouldn't have said, that white individuals are white devils, but the fact that he was able to acknowledge that and say, yeah, I probably should have used different words. Maybe I should have had a change of heart. That is a great example to follow, because one, it acknowledges that no one's perfect, that we all make mistakes, and oftentimes we make mistakes and we don't realize it. We think we're doing the right thing. I'm sure at the time he was like, this is the best way to say it, and he felt very passionate about that. But two, being able to accept, kind of knock yourself down a few pegs and say, I shouldn't have done that, like be humble about yourself. What better example is there? Because it's not like I know I've said things that I regretted. I know I've done things that I regret. Acting like I'm perfect and like I would never say anything just as bad. Like I've said things before that I wish I hadn't. But being able to say, yeah, that person is not who I hope to be. I hope that I can be better than that in the future. I acknowledge that what I said was wrong, but I hope to be better in the future. That is a great example for anybody. Anybody, no matter who you are, your age, race, creed, color, whatever. It does not matter. That is a great example. Another great example that comes to mind is, I forget the name of her book, but I believe her name is Katherine Johnson. She there was a movie not just about her, but she was one of the few African American women that helped the mission to the moon occur. The movie Hidden Figures, I forget what year it came out, but that movie not only has a great soundtrack, I will say, but there was a book, I forget the name of it. It's on, I forget what it is. If you're curious, just look up Katherine Johnson book. It's a great book. But people like that, she talks about from a young age, like her family and her dealing with so many people just not giving them any help from the start. No one giving her the opportunity to excel from the start. But she worked through all of that, and she became an incredibly successful. She was an incredibly intelligent individual, and without her, we probably wouldn't have reached the moon. Think about that. That is such an incredible, integral part of human history, not just U.S. history, but human history, that we were able to do that. Without her and the individuals around her, we wouldn't be able to say these things. We wouldn't be able to say that we did that. And I think individuals like her, like Dr. King, like Maya Angelou, like Malcolm X, I think they all have great positive benefits that we can look at them and say they were not perfect people. No one is. Everyone has their flaws. Everyone's said things, done things that maybe we wish we hadn't said and done. But it doesn't end there. The example goes beyond that. And I think if we correctly assess these examples and use them in our own lives, that's a great way to teach children. You don't have to necessarily sit down with a 6-year-old and talk about systemic issues, because they're probably gonna be like, yeah, I don't really care. But if you can show them these great examples of, hey, there was someone that looks just like you that was able to help bring a man to the moon. That is crazy. That you can say, hey, there was someone that is just like you. He grew up and he was one of the most famous people of all time, and he was a great orator. He spoke in front of the Washington Monument. I forget in Washington, wherever it was. I forget exactly what it was. I mean, that's a great example. Yeah, they're not perfect. They messed up. But who hasn't? Who isn't flawed? And I think that's a great way for anybody to learn, to look at these examples and to assess that, yeah, they've had some imperfections, but they were able to move past those imperfections and make a positive impact and set a great example for everybody that came after them. I think that's beautiful. And I hope that, if at the very least anybody will check out any of those individuals, if you haven't already, check out those individuals we've been talking about, because they're great people. They really do set a high standard, and I think that we can learn a lot from both their imperfections and the things that they do well. You know.
I agree.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious. So, for you, is there somebody? You mentioned your father, and he's had a big impact on you. Is there anybody else specifically, whether it be like a national figure or like anybody here locally that's had a big impact on you that has inspired you to do what you do today? Or
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm like you. I've been blessed to come from a wonderful family,
Mm-hmm.
as well as along my journey to have had people who just brought me in to be the wind beneath my wings,
Yeah.
and to help me grow and to challenge me to do better, to be better, and to be a good leader.
Mm-hmm.
Which I've struggled with that, because I never sought leadership,
Mm-hmm.
but the everything is like pulling me to that, and it's like
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
But I would start with besides my mom, my mom went from being Pos Homes, which used to be a public housing project here in Chattanooga. She's now over Emerging Technology Lab at TVA. She went to school to be a chemist when she had 2 babies and was pregnant with another.
Yeah.
Was a teen mom, but still just did it. And my father, who worked 2 jobs, the majority of my life, worked 2 jobs and went back to college, and a military serviceman. Like, that man literally has given me, the both of them have given me my drive, but for him, it's just saying, like, he never made any excuses about doing something. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from them, my grandmothers, my matriarchs, the glue that held both sides of my family together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, being able to hear about Chattanooga in the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It wasn't all bad,
Yeah.
but you know, the good and the bad.
Yeah.
You know, my grandmother would talk about what it would be like on a Sunday morning, how everybody would be in their Sunday best. Like, we definitely don't do that now. But would be in their Sunday best, and she could go on Vine Street or could go on 10th Street and get popcorn, and you know, my Aunt Nellie, who was her little sister, could go get a drink, and
Yeah.
they could just go hear jazz and do
Yeah.
all sorts of kind of stuff. Like, you know, I love my grandmother's Eric Atkins, A.M.P. Air, Dr. Tommy Brown, Sherman Matthews, may he rest in peace. Oh man, so many people have helped me.
Yeah.
So many people have helped me, and seeing this loudmouth, scrappy young lady from East Chattanooga with an afro, you know, and have helped shape me and mold me. Like,
Yeah.
Harvard would have never happened. TEDx would have never happened last year. So much of my life, I don't think I ever would have thought I could do, had the courage to do, the knowledge to do, if it wasn't for people who poured into me, if it wasn't for people who have chastised me when I've been foolish or wrong.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
You know, I have made some terrible mistakes.
Yeah.
And the fact that I have a platform, I've made some public mistakes where other people can just, you know, kind of hide in the corner somewhere. You know, my mistakes have been public, but the cool thing about that is I've gotten a lot of feedback from people as I have been talking to folks in the community running for public office this time, and a lot of people have acknowledged, like, Marie, like, we see your growth.
Yeah.
Which is, like, that makes my heart flutter.
Yeah.
You know, that people can see, like, where I started is not where I am right now. And I hope that I can be an inspiration that you can blow being human sometimes, but you can also, you know, go through the struggle of what it means to change, and that you can make an impact that you might spend all of your time downplaying. And one day you might come to the acknowledgement that you saved somebody's life, or you connected somebody with an opportunity, or you inspired somebody. You know, Tupac Shakur had a saying in an interview. He said, I might not change the world, but I guarantee you I'm going to spark the brain that changes the world. You know,
Yeah.
I don't have to change the world. If I can spark the brain of a young person that goes 10 times 1,000 further than me,
Yeah.
I've done my job.
That's beautiful.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so just think about it that way. You know, we everybody is not going to be at the same level of impact, but at the very least, if you could spark the brain of some young person to do great things and to realize, you know, the beauty of human existence is talent can come from anywhere, that intelligence and can come from anywhere. You know, what if there wasn't an opportunity for a Black woman to do math? We never would have went to the moon, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So everybody needs to have the ability to be decent at math.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we need to get to Mars, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think we should go back to the moon at least once, you know, one more time, you know.
We never know how far we're going to go
Yeah.
if we just continue to operate how we're operating, which is just keeping one another at an arm's distance.
Yeah, yeah.
And really, I think it is because, you know, we're a little bit afraid of giving up our own personal identity, or think that we have to in order to be a whole, and we don't.
Yeah.
You know, you can have your identity and respect the identity of others and be able to sit at a table just like we're doing. Have we fought?
No. I don't want to fight with you. You seem a little bit more feisty than I am, so I may be taller, but I don't want to fight with you, I promise.
You know, and I believe that even if we disagreed on something, you know, we could do that respectfully.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, you know, I'm not going to get up from the table and like
Yeah.
grab my stuff and like march out of here
Yeah.
and go down the elevator,
Yeah.
take the stairs so I don't have to take the elevator.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not that serious.
Yeah.
We can have our own experience and just look at other people as an opportunity. It's like they're the socket, we're the plug. We
Yeah.
can plug into other people and
Yeah.
just be able to draw inspiration and share energy with one another, right?
Yeah.
That's how I want, if you get nothing else from this podcast today, like see yourself as a plug, and everybody you meet is a socket.
Yeah.
And you have an opportunity to plug into that person and to draw inspiration and knowledge and pain and passion
Yeah.
and all sorts of things, and that you can give those same things in return. And if we go about life like that, where we look at people as an opportunity to plug in and just share energy with one another, I think we'll do fine.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. There's going to be a lot more good done from being able to listen to each other and plugging into one another and hearing the stories of each other's lives. There's going to be a lot more good than negative that comes from that. And that is the thing that I continually see, especially from my time at UTC, from, you know, before that, back in high school. I mean, looking back now, the more people I meet from different backgrounds, and even people that are similar, like that, people that I've known my entire life. I mean, being able to listen to individuals and to draw from them while they draw from me, it's such a net positive for the both of us, you know, and that positive influence and that positive impact at large can have such a great benefit for everybody involved. You don't have to be the most talkative person in the world. You know, you don't have to be the most, as you said, the most rambunctious person in the world or anything. You don't have to, like, you can just listen to individuals and just soak in their life experience and allow that to impact you positively. And if you can do that, there's a lot of good that can come from that, I think, both personally in your own life and, you know, culturally, societally, there's a lot of good that can come from that. And I hope that whoever listens to this, you know, like you said, maybe we won't change the world, but if we can spark somebody, the person that will change the world, that's a great thing. So yeah, I agree. One more thing I want to ask you about. So you are running for city council, is that correct?
I am.
What is for you? What do you hope? Whether you, I'm not familiar with exactly the process of city council, but is the word elect? Would that be the correct word? Okay, I just want to make. I was like, is that the correct word for this? Whether you are elected or not, what do you hope is the biggest change you hope to see in the Chattanooga community in the next year, 2, 3, 4 years, whether or not you're elected? Obviously, after speaking with you today, you seem like a great individual, and I think you would do a great job. You seem like you have a heart of gold, and like you have a love for people. So that's a great place to start. But whether or not you end up as a city council member, what do you hope? What's the change you hope to see in the Chattanooga area in the future?
Well, the masses of the people are disengaged, but I think part of that is because they don't they don't feel like there is a path to a future, and don't understand that the future is abundant. Because of technology and the way that times are changing, there is actually more opportunity in the future than I think we realize. One of the things that I want to do is bring more people together on group activities to be able to do things in the community to positively benefit them. You know, one of the things that I found is that nothing changes unless you're willing to work at changing.
Yeah.
And so how can I bring different demographics of people together to be able to start making even just very small changes? Because everything that needs to happen in our city and in our communities is not like long-term goals. There's a lot that is what I consider like low-hanging fruit. Small things that we can do that just take us actually coming together and strategizing about how we're going to move forward. So I actually want to work with the community, whether I'm elected or not, to teach us like, how do you work together in a group of people?
Yeah.
That's a skill set.
Yeah.
And how do you work together with people who you don't agree with?
Yeah.
There is a great example, actually it comes from Jackson, Mississippi, which is the People's Assembly. If you actually research that and look it up for Jackson, Mississippi, there is a public civic engagement model of how people and those who are in positions of leadership, so whether that's the police chief, fire chief, firefighters, regular firefighters, you know what I mean? How do all of those people come together in community meetings and have like breakout groups? And every person has like one issue. And so there's no leadership structure at the table. Everyone has equal voice, equal footing. And you are responsible for working with who's ever at your table about how you're going to start tackling that problem. And then coming back to the group and reporting back. And that's where you start plotting out plans about issues and various different things. And so, you know, that's one of the things that I am not only an encourager, but I like to empower people. I believe in the philosophy of Ella Baker. If you have not read about her, you definitely should. She is the person who basically is responsible for a tremendous amount of the grassroots movement for the civil rights struggle. I mean, that's a bad one.
Yeah, yeah.
She trained pretty much all of the SNCC organizers. So like Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, Diane Nash, when we think about John Lewis, who a lot of people love, she trained him. And these were college students at the time. So being able to instill different ways of how can people become change agents where they are. Because if everybody leaves the responsibility up to Marie Mott, I only can do so much because I'm one person, right? But if I can create agents of change, if I can give you a framework of how do you go about creating change, how do you go about engaging the people around you, and bringing in more people, more voices, and people being able to see, well, you know, change is possible, and that things are possible, that, you know, there is a brighter future that is ahead of us. Maybe it's not as dark as I thought it was. Right? And that I can do something about it. That's what I want to put in people. I can do. You know, John F. Kennedy stated in his inauguration, "That's not what this country can do for you, but what can you do for your country?" So when I went to Harvard, one of the books that we were given is stamped on the front, "Ask what you can do." That's what you can do. So I want people to be able to get to such a point where they're so excited, like, what can I do today to be able to push our community, our neighborhood in a positive direction? And so I just want to, you know, just light a fire in people and get them to collaborate and connect with one another, even if they don't agree. And how can we do that in a way where we have dignity and respect for one another, so that we can make some positive change in Chattanooga and maybe set a worldwide standard, not for poverty or for disenfranchisement, but we set a world-class example of what it means to be a big little city and actually right some wrongs and forge ahead. The internet, even though we say the fastest internet is the best thing we have, it's not. The best thing that we have is people
Exactly.
in this city. And if, oh my goodness, if we just invest in people,
Mm-hmm.
if we bring in people, that's how the big little city of Chattanooga, man, we're going to be a world-class example. That's what I want.
I love it. I love it. That's great. That is. I hope that if I could bottle that up and keep it with me wherever I go, I wish I could do that. But that is great. First off, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. This is, for me personally, been a long time coming. As I mentioned, obviously this is the first time we're meeting in person, but I've been wanting to do something like this of positive impact before. At some point, I never really knew how to go about it, and I felt like at some point using my voice would be the best way to do it. And so it's not only been a pleasure hearing from you, but I hope you've enjoyed hearing from me, and I hope that this conversation can be, I know it's been beneficial for me, I hope it can be beneficial for everybody that listens to it. Before we finish up, a little bit of a tradition that we have with each episode, to kind of finish everything on a bit of a different note, I like to give 15 quick questions to you. They're all this or that. They're totally unrelated to everything we've been talking about. So this is totally unrelated, but 15 quick questions. They're all this or that. So, A or B. And I just want to get your off the dome. What you think? Your gut response. You don't have to think about it too much, but I want to hear what you say. So you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. This is 15 quick questions with Marie Mott. Number 1, waffles or pancakes?
Waffles.
East or West Coast? Oh, I would agree. Yes. East or West Coast?
East Coast. That's where I'm from.
Staying in or going out?
Staying in.
Summer or winter?
Ooh, winter.
I agree. Thank you. Yes. Guacamole or salsa?
Guacamole.
Movie marathon or TV marathon?
Movie.
Crunchy or creamy peanut butter?
Creamy. Oh, it's stuck in the deep.
See, I'm a crunchy. Man. Me and your
He
dad.
likes extra crunchy.
Yeah, we would get along. We would get along just fine. Sunrise or sunset?
Oh, sunset.
Hot or iced coffee?
Iced.
70s, 80s, or 90s?
70s.
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Oh, absolutely not.
Oh, that's a hot take. Michael Jackson or Prince?
Michael Jackson.
Would you rather ride a tricycle, a bicycle, or a unicycle?
Bicycle.
Fiction or nonfiction books?
Nonfiction.
Okay, and then the 15 question, the one that we ended off with, would you rather have to fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? That's the one I always try to throw people off with.
Oh man.
And I want to hear your rationale with this one.
So say that one more time.
Okay, would you rather have to fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
I'll take the horse-sized duck because I have actually, horses look cute and everything, but man, you go up to them and I fed a horse an apple.
They mean business.
And I felt like I almost got my hand cut off. First of all, they don't look that big until you walk up on them.
They're big.
And then I forget the breed of horses that are in Kentucky that are like, you can like walk up under them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'll take one duck that's
Yeah.
like that size. But like, no, not the horses.
That's funny.
I'll get stampeded.
Okay.
I can rock with the
Yeah. Hey, I can. That sounds good to me. So, anyways, that was your 15 quick questions. Thank you for that. Before we finish off, I want to give you the floor. If there's anybody you want to give a shout out to, if there's anything you're working on, I know you said you're running for city council, but whatever you got going on, the floor is yours. So,
Absolutely. So if you're listening, I don't know when this will come out. So depending on, you could always.
I'm gonna hope to have. Well, I don't know when this episode. I'm gonna hope to start this by June.
Okay. Cool.
So I don't know what your timeline is, but if that helps a little bit.
So you can tap in and see what are some of the things that I have as far as opinions for changing my community. VoteMott.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can find me at 4, 2, TWO, 3, Marie, MARIE, on all social media platforms. And anytime I end a live stream or a conversation, I have something that I give to the people as a gift. And that is, no one has told you today, I love you. And guess what, family? There ain't nothing you can do about it. I love you all. There's nothing you can do about it, my people.
Yeah.
Nothing.
I love it. Well, again,
Thank you for having me.
thank you for coming in. It's been a pleasure. I wish you the best of luck with when does the city council race conclude?
August the 4th.
August the 4th. Okay. Well, I will have this out by then. I'll give you that. I'll guarantee I'll have this out by then so people can hear about you and can hear a little bit about what you do and what you got going on. But yeah, I'll make sure to put your Instagrams. I know you're on LinkedIn. I'll put all you said you do have a website. Is that correct?
I do.
I'll make sure to put all those links in the description. So if you want to check out Marie and see what she's got going on, then you can go down to the description and give her a follow. But yeah, thank you again for being here today with me, and thank you all for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.